Putting the finest horsehair on any violin bow can be a wonderful experience for the musician and the luthier, but only if both know exactly what they're getting into and all the questions to ask before the work begins. If it's lost more than 6 hairs on the leading edge, this can make your bow feel like it wants to fall over, and also can warp the bow over time in the worst direction. If there are more than 10 hairs missing anywhere due to grinding the stick against the strings, excessive pounding, or dragging the hair sideways because of crooked bowing. If there are any hairs missing due to hair mites, and this means that it's time to fumigate your closet and violin case. If the hair is dirty or crusted over with old caked rosin. If the hair has stretched too far over time and the hair won't tighten. If you're playing in a climate that's a lot more humid than when the bow was last rehaired. Violin bow hair can shorten or lengthen up to 6 millimeters due to extreme changes in humidity. If the hair no longer takes and holds the rosin as well as it used to. Even with proper rosining, the surface texture of horsehair eventually wears out by rubbing against the strings. If the hair has come loose from the tip or the frog, to help prevent this, if a hair breaks, don't pull on it, cut it off. Yet, if it truly is an emergency, hold the hair down the best you can and break it off in the opposite direction. If your bow ever needs major repairs. Factory bows are notorious for needing to be rehaired because the hair is almost always put on in a humid climate. Sometimes the hair can be stretched out, but more often than not, most factory bows will need to be rehaired. At the same time, these same factory bows almost always need the hair cleaned with alcohol to remove the oils before you add any rosin, or you may find yourself needing to rehair the bow even if the hair length is correct. Look for cracks and separation in the ivory. This thin, sharp corner is notorious for them, and the slightest hairline crack adds a lot of risk to a successful rehair, and whether the wood wedge will hold the hair in place properly or not. Look for cracks and repairs in the wood all the way down the stick, focusing especially around the head. A violin bow is subjected to about 30% more stress during a rehair than at any other time, and many a luthier has been blamed for breaking a bow when it wasn't necessarily their fault, except for possibly missing a crack during their inspection, and especially those hidden by dirt and rosin. This is also why violin bows should be cleaned before stretching the hair. At the same time, I've also seen a seemingly flawless old bow literally fall into 2 pieces by simply tightening the screw for the first time in over a century. And this is why most violin shops have disclaimers about breakage while rehairing your bow. Also make sure to remove the frog and look for cracks around the mortise and the end. while it's off, check the frog for cracks, though some of the most common ones might be hidden by the ferrule. Also check that the metal slide is still glued in place. Check that the screw is fully seated in the button. On most bows, the screw is pressed into place with more force than the hair pulls on it during normal use, and it usually stays in its place forever. Yet, if the hair stretches out too long and a frustrated musician keeps turning the screw after the eyelet reaches the end of the mortise, it either pulls out the screw, cracks the bow between the mortise and the end, or both. Then inspect the threads of the eyelet and screw. The less slop, the better. If the screw has gotten more difficult to turn over time, it's usually because the threads in the eyelet are worn to the point of barely holding on, and they're about to strip out. Check that the threads of the screw extend to the end of the mortise. If a screw has been replaced and doesn't match the length of the mortise, the end of its threads can strip off the last few threads of a new eyelet in a matter of days, especially if the hair is slightly on the short side. Take a picture of the frog and the button. Take the photograph because I am truly amazed at how many times I've seen original frogs and screws swapped out by unscrupulous and sometimes even unknowing dealers. This can cut the value of a fine bow in half, and it's almost impossible to prove after the fact. On the other hand, it's amazing what musicians don't notice sometimes. I've seen very reputable shops blamed for stealing frogs and screws when they weren't the ones who did it, which is a very good reason why violin shops should also take pictures when any valuable bow comes in. And if a shop says that they have to replace the button because the threads are bad, like what happened on this silver-mounted bow, which now has a cheap chrome button, ask that dealer why they can't just replace the screw and retain the value of the bow. Because original and wonderful is truly rare, yet in this case, affordable. Buy your copy today, and a copy for everyone you know who could use just a little more happiness right now. Inspect the winding and make sure that it's tight. And remember that the balance of a bow can be slightly adjusted by the weight of the winding. If it does need replaced, make sure to specify what material or metal will be used and whether it's solid or just plated. Inspect the leather grip and decide if it's worn or if it's simply right for you. I'll have to make another video because it's amazing the difference that the correct grip thickness and shape can make on a fine bow. Check the camber and the straightness. Once again, I'll have to make a video. Yet, in a nutshell, the stick should just barely touch the hair when it's loosened. The head and the frog should align with each other, and vertically, the stick should be straight, or ever so slightly turned to the right.